The ground trembles without warning, the sky darkens with fury, and ancient civilizations had no science to explain why. They turned to stories of angry gods and cosmic battles to make sense of a terrifying world. From the wrath of Poseidon shaking the earth to the fury of Ra scorching the land, these myths did more than entertain. They shaped empires, guided rituals, and even built the earliest forms of disaster preparedness. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these ancient explanations reveal a universal human need to find meaning in chaos. Why did cultures separated by oceans imagine such similar stories of divine punishment? How did myths about floods and quakes influence the rise and fall of civilizations? What can we learn from these age-old tales about our own relationship with nature's power? What do you think drives us to tell stories when faced with the unknown? These stories were the operating system of entire civilizations, a complex code of belief that explained everything from the changing seasons to the ground splitting open. Without the tools of modern science, ancient peoples used mythology as their primary lens for understanding a frightening and unpredictable world. A sudden volcanic eruption was not a geological event, it was the fiery breath of an angered god. A devastating tsunami was not the result of an underwater earthquake, but the vengeance of a sea deity. These narratives provided a crucial sense of order, transforming random, senseless tragedies into events with a cause and, importantly, a potential solution. If a disaster was caused by a displeased god, then that god could be appeased. This belief system gave people a semblance of control, a way to actively participate in their own survival through rituals, sacrifices, and prayers. These myths became the bedrock of society, weaving together moral codes, laws, and community identity. They taught people how to live, what to value, and how to behave to maintain the delicate balance of the natural world. The very architecture of cities was often designed to honor these forces, with temples built to withstand tremors or placate specific deities. By creating a story, our ancestors transformed overwhelming fear into a manageable problem, a puzzle that could be solved through faith and practice. This human need to find a narrative, to assign a reason for our suffering, is a powerful force that still echoes in how we process modern catastrophes. The Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was a cradle of civilization, yet it was also a landscape of profound vulnerability. Here, the Mesopotamians lived at the mercy of two powerful rivers and the unpredictable skies above. Their worldview was not one of random chance but of divine intention. Every disaster, from a sudden sandstorm to a catastrophic flood, was seen as a direct message from the gods, a form of cosmic punishment or warning. At the heart of this belief system stood Enlil, the god of wind, air, and storms, whose breath could bring a gentle breeze or a city-flattening tempest. Alongside him was E, the clever god of water and wisdom, who governed the life-giving and life-destroying powers of the rivers. When the Euphrates overflowed its banks, wiping out entire villages, it was not a natural event. It was the calculated wrath of a deity who had been offended. This idea is immortalized in one of humanity's oldest stories, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which recounts a great, world-covering flood sent by the Council of Gods to wipe out a humanity that had become too noisy and disruptive. This was not pure fantasy. It was a myth born from lived experience, a narrative crafted to explain the terrifying, real-life inundations that could erase months of labor in a single day. To navigate this fearful relationship with the divine, the Mesopotamians developed a complex science of divination. Priests who held immense power would meticulously examine the livers of sacrificed sheep, searching for marks and patterns they believed were messages from the gods. They tracked the movements of planets and stars, interpreting celestial events as omens for future calamities on Earth. The response to these prophetic signs was a series of elaborate rituals designed to appease divine anger. This could involve animal sacrifices, ceremonial prayers, or the construction of massive, stepped temples called ziggurats. These towering structures were not just places of worship, they were literally believed to be earthly homes for the gods, a physical bridge between heaven and earth built to keep the deities happy and close. This entire system did more than just explain disasters. It actively shaped Mesopotamian society. It gave kings and priests their authority, as they were the essential intermediaries between a fearful populace and the unpredictable gods. A king's divine mandate to rule was directly tied to his ability to protect his people from supernatural threats. In this way, mythology and power became completely intertwined, creating a social order where the explanation for nature's fury also reinforced the hierarchy that controlled every aspect of life. The Mesopotamian approach was a powerful blend of careful observation and profound mythology, a coherent worldview that would echo for millennia. Far to the south, along the life-giving Nile, an entirely different system of belief tried to impose order on a chaotic world. For the ancient Egyptians, the universe was not governed by a council of irritable gods, but by a single, perfect principle known as Maat. This was the concept of cosmic order, truth, and justice, a delicate balance that held all of creation together. A natural disaster was not merely a storm or an earthquake, it was a catastrophic tear in the very fabric of Maat, a sign that chaos was breaking through. The god most often associated with this destructive chaos was Seth, the deity of violence, storms, and the harsh desert. When the earth trembled or a drought scorched the land, it was seen as the work of Seth, a direct assault on the established order. Yet the Egyptians also recognized the benevolent forces of nature. The annual, predictable flooding of the Nile was not a disaster, but a divine gift. This life-giving event was attributed to Hapi, the god of the river, whose inundation brought fertile black silt that sustained their entire civilization. This cycle of chaos and renewal was central to their existence, but who was responsible for keeping this delicate balance? That duty fell to the pharaoh. He was not just a king, he was a living god, the sole intermediary between the people and the divine realm. His most sacred duty was to maintain Maat through constant ritual. Every prayer he offered, every ceremony performed, was an act of cosmic maintenance, a way of holding back the chaos of Seth and ensuring the continued generosity of Hapi. This is why they built monuments on such an unimaginable scale. The Great Pyramids were far more than just tombs, they were massive machines for preserving balance, their very geometry and alignment thought to anchor and stabilize the cosmic order. This belief that human action directly influenced the natural world is detailed in texts like the Book of the Dead, which describes how failures in moral or religious duty could invite terrible divine retribution. If the people were immoral, or if the pharaoh was neglectful in his rituals, the gods would withdraw their protection, and chaos would flood into the world. This created a powerful cause and effect relationship between behavior and environment, weaving spiritual belief, political power, and the natural world into a single, unbreakable tapestry. The Egyptian system was a profound attempt to create harmony between humanity and the divine, using the threat of disaster to enforce a code of social and moral conduct that held their society together for thousands of years. Across the Mediterranean, a new pantheon of gods ruled the heavens and the earth with a very human capriciousness. For the ancient Greeks, the world was a stage for divine drama, and natural disasters were the most spectacular performances. The sea did not simply churn, it was the mood of Poseidon, the earth shaker, striding across the waves. A trembling mountain was not a geological event, it was the footstep of a titan buried deep below. And a lightning strike was never an atmospheric discharge. It was the unmistakable, terrifying signature of Zeus himself, hurling a thunderbolt in righteous fury. This was a world where nature was not an indifferent force but a deeply personal one, animated by the passions, rivalries, and tempers of the Olympians. The concept of hubris, or excessive pride, was central to this worldview. To overstep your place as a mortal, to challenge the gods or claim their glory, was to invite a catastrophic response. This idea is perfectly captured in the legend of Atlantis, a story told by the philosopher Plato. He described a powerful, technologically advanced island nation that grew arrogant and morally corrupt. As punishment for their hubris, the gods sent a single, terrible day and night of fire and earthquakes, and the entire island was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever. This was not just a thrilling story, it was a powerful moral lesson about the consequences of defying the natural and divine order. To navigate this volatile relationship, the Greeks developed intricate systems of communication with the divine. The most famous was the oracle at Delphi, where a priestess, breathing mysterious vapors from a crack in the earth, would deliver cryptic prophecies. Rulers and common citizens alike would journey for days to ask the oracle how to avoid impending disasters, how to win wars, or how to appease an angry god. The answers were never straightforward, but they provided a crucial sense of agency. If you could just interpret the signs correctly, you might avert catastrophe. This need for appeasement fueled a culture of grand festivals and sacrifices. Entire cities would hold processions and offer prized animals to Poseidon before a sea voyage, or to Demeter to ensure a good harvest, desperately hoping to stay on the right side of divine favor. Yet, even within this deeply mythological culture, the first seeds of a new way of thinking were taking root. Philosophers like Aristotle began to observe the world with a different eye. He proposed that earthquakes were not caused by Poseidon's trident, but by winds trapped in subterranean caves, struggling to escape. This was a revolutionary attempt to find a natural, rather than a supernatural, cause for a terrifying event. This created a fascinating tension in Greek society, a duality of thought where the old myths still held powerful sway over the popular imagination, inspiring epic poetry and magnificent art, while a new, rational curiosity began to ask questions that would eventually lay the groundwork for modern science. This Greek blend of vibrant myth and budding reason would become a foundational pillar for the Western world, passed directly to the Romans and echoing through the centuries to come. While the Greeks saw drama in the heavens, ancient China sought a more profound cosmic balance. The Chinese worldview was built on a foundation of harmony, where the actions of humanity were directly linked to the stability of the universe itself. At the very center of this philosophy was the mandate of heaven, a revolutionary idea that did not just explain disasters, but actively shaped the fate of entire dynasties. This mandate was a divine right to rule, but it was conditional, not absolute. A ruler only held this power as long as he governed with wisdom, virtue, and justice. When he failed, heaven itself would send a warning. A devastating earthquake was not a random tectonic shift, it was a celestial reprimand. A prolonged drought was not a weather pattern, it was a sign that the emperor had lost the favor of the cosmos. These disasters were the ultimate political omen, a clear signal that the mandate of heaven had been withdrawn, and that rebellion was not just justified but divinely sanctioned. This belief provided a powerful mechanism for political change, allowing new dynasties to rise from the ashes of natural calamities, claiming they were restoring the balance that a corrupt ruler had broken. The roots of this system are incredibly old, stretching back to the Shang dynasty. Their priests would inscribe questions onto ox scapulae and turtle shells, applying heat until they cracked. They believed the pattern of these cracks were direct messages from the ancestors, omens predicting everything from the outcome of a battle to the cause of a coming famine. These oracle bones are some of the earliest records of humanity, trying to systematically decode the intentions of the universe through natural signs. This practice evolved through the Zhou dynasty and was deeply enriched by the philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism. Confucius taught that a ruler's personal virtue was the key to a stable society and a harmonious natural world. Disasters were not just acts of God, but the direct result of a failure in human morality, a disconnect between the ruler and the ruled. Taoism emphasized flowing with the natural order, the Tao. A disaster was a violent manifestation of imbalance, a rupture in the flow of yin and yang that governed all existence. To correct this, the emperor, as the son of heaven, had a sacred duty to perform elaborate rituals. The most significant were the Feng and Shan ceremonies conducted on Mount Tai. These were not simple prayers, they were massive state events where the emperor would report to heaven on his governance and humbly seek to realign the human world with the cosmic order. For guidance in this immense responsibility, rulers turned to texts like the I Ching or Book of Changes. This ancient manual was used as a complex system to interpret the patterns of the world, to understand the hidden messages in events, and make decisions that would maintain harmony and avoid disaster. This intricate web of belief, politics, and philosophy created a unique system where the weather and the wellness of the state were one and the same. The emperor was accountable not just to his people, but to the universe itself, and the ground shaking beneath his feet was the most powerful vote of no confidence imaginable. Deep within the steamy jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya built a civilization obsessed with time, not as a straight line, but as a great turning wheel. For them, a hurricane was not a random storm, and a drought was not a simple lack of rain. These events were chapters in a vast, celestial story written in the movements of the stars and the complex gears of their calendars. Disasters were not punishments in a linear sense, but expected, albeit terrifying, parts of a cyclical cosmic order where destruction always paved the way for renewal. At the heart of this belief were powerful, capricious gods who controlled the very elements of life. Chok, the rain god with a serpent-like face, wielded his lightning axe to split the clouds and bring life-giving water. But when angered, he could withhold that rain for years, turning fertile land to dust. Then there was Hurakan, a terrifying deity whose name literally means one-legged, and from whom we get our word hurricane. He was the embodiment of the wild, destructive wind that could flatten entire cities with his breath. The Maya did not see these gods as distant rulers, but as intimate, volatile forces that required constant appeasement. To maintain this delicate balance, they developed one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in the ancient world. The long count calendar tracked vast epochs of time, each ending in a period of potential cataclysm and rebirth. This was not a prediction of a single final doom, but a recognition that the universe itself underwent periodic resets. Their sacred text, the Popol Vuh, describes previous ages or suns, each populated by a different kind of humanity that was ultimately wiped out by floods, fires, and jaguars because they failed to honor the gods. This mythology provided a template for understanding their own world's vulnerabilities. The duty of maintaining the cycle fell to the king and the priests. Through intense, often painful bloodletting rituals, Maya rulers would pierce their own tongues or genitals to collect blood on paper, which was then burned as an offering. The rising smoke was believed to open a portal to the spirit world, allowing them to commune with ancestors and deities to plead for rain and fertility. They combined this spiritual practice with breathtaking astronomical precision. From observatories like the Caracol at Chichen Itza, priests tracked the precise path of Venus, believing its movements could influence weather patterns and foretell the coming of war or drought. This fusion of precise science and profound faith was their early warning system, and then their world truly was tested. Around the 9th century, a series of prolonged, severe droughts gripped the Maya heartland. From their perspective, this could only mean one thing: their rituals had failed. The king, the divine intermediary, had lost his connection to Chak. The gods had turned away. This perceived divine abandonment, coupled with a very real environmental crisis, likely led to a catastrophic loss of faith in the leadership, triggering the political fragmentation and abandonment of the great cities we see in the archaeological record. Yet, even in this collapse, the Maya worldview held a thread of hope, for if time is a cycle, then an ending is never truly final. It is merely the necessary prelude to a new beginning. Theirs was a philosophy of resilience, a belief that humanity's role was to read the patterns, perform the rituals, and adapt to the inevitable turns of the cosmic wheel. Far to the north, where the sea froze and the sun hid for months, a culture developed a worldview not of balance or appeasement, but of inevitable, glorious doom. For the Norse, the world itself was a temporary construction, and natural disasters were not divine punishments but rehearsals for the final performance. The entire cosmos was barreling toward Ragnarok, a climactic series of winters, earthquakes, and floods that would end the age of gods and men. This was not a myth of hope, but one of fatalistic acceptance. When the ground shuddered in Scandinavia, it was not a random tremor. People believed it was the agonized thrashing of the trickster god Loki, bound in a cave with a serpent dripping venom onto his face, struggling against his chains. A violent storm at sea was not just bad weather, it was a glimpse of the world serpent, Jormungandr, rising from the depths, and a volcanic eruption was the fiery breath of the giant Surtur, waiting with his flaming sword to engulf the world in the final battle. This perspective transformed every hardship into a chapter of a grand, inescapable narrative. The gods themselves were not all-powerful guardians, but flawed warriors facing their own prophesied demise. Thor, with his mighty hammer Mjolnir, was the defender of humanity. His thunderous chariot rides across the sky, explaining the rumble of storms, but he too was destined to fall in battle at Ragnarok. Odin, the All-Father, constantly sought wisdom not to prevent the end, but to prepare for it. This belief system forged a unique cultural identity defined by courage in the face of certain doom. The sagas and Eddas are filled with heroes who meet catastrophic events, whether a blizzard or a monster, not with prayer for deliverance, but with raw bravery and honor. What was the point of fearing a flood if the entire world was destined to drown? The only thing that mattered was how one faced it. This did not mean they were passive. The Vikings performed rituals known as blots, offering sacrifices of animals, and sometimes even humans, to gods like Freya for a good harvest or Njord for safe passage across treacherous waters. These were not attempts to change destiny, but to seek favor and strength for the journey ahead. Theirs was a practical fatalism, a philosophy that encouraged both acceptance of fate and vigorous preparation for it. They built ships capable of weathering the North Atlantic's fury and told stories that hardened their spirits against the world's harshness. The Norse teach us that explaining disaster is not always about finding a reason. Sometimes it is about finding the resolve to face it. Their myths provided a framework for that resolve, turning the terrifying uncertainty of nature into a test of character that would be remembered in song long after the storm had passed. This worldview of interconnected spirits extended far beyond the great empires to countless indigenous cultures across the Americas. For these peoples, the wind was not an empty force, and a mountain was never just a pile of rock. Every element of the natural world was alive with consciousness, a vast web of relationships where humanity was just one participant, not the master. A sudden earthquake striking the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was understood as the god Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, shifting the earth beneath his feet. High in the Andes, the Inca felt the same tremors and knew them as the anger of Pachamama, the Earth Mother, a direct response to human neglect or imbalance. The solution was not to conquer this force, but to respectfully realign with it through offerings of food, drink, or in the most significant ceremonies, the Capacocha, which involved the sacrifice of unblemished children to appease the volcanoes and ensure the sun's return. This was not mere superstition, it was a sophisticated system of ecological accountability. Stories passed down through generations reinforced this contract. The Navajo tell of the hero twins who journeyed to slay the monsters that brought chaos and disaster to the world. Their victory did not erase danger, but it established the principles for how humans must live with respect and humility to keep those ancient terrors at bay. This deep awareness translated into action through ritual. The Hopi and other Pueblo peoples performed elaborate dances to call upon the Cachinas, spirit beings who brought rain to the parched desert. A successful ceremony meant survival, a failed one could mean famine. This belief system created a profound feedback loop where a disaster was rarely a random act. It was a message, a corrective measure from the world itself, urging a return to balance. It fostered a way of life that saw resources as gifts to be stewarded, not commodities to be exploited. This animistic perspective offers a powerful contrast to the narratives of divine punishment we saw elsewhere. Here, the relationship was less about appeasing a distant, judgmental ruler, and more about maintaining a respectful dialogue with the very living world around them. It reminds us that long before modern environmentalism, ancient cultures had already crafted intricate philosophies that tied human behavior directly to the health of the planet, seeing in every storm a reminder and in every quake a plea for harmony. But even the most stoic fatalism could not prepare a culture for every disaster. In ancient India, a land of monsoons and tectonic shifts, the explanation for catastrophe was woven into the very rhythm of the cosmos itself. Here, destruction was not an ending but a necessary part of an eternal cycle, a dance as precise as it was terrifying. This dance was the Tandava of the god Shiva, the great destroyer. His furious, ecstatic movements were believed to shake the very foundations of the world, causing the earth to tremble and volcanoes to roar to life. Yet this was not an act of meaningless rage. Shiva's destruction was always in service of renewal, clearing away the old and worn out to make space for new creation. This idea of cyclical annihilation is central to Hindu thought, detailed in texts like the Puranas. They speak of pralaya, a great dissolution. This was not a single, final apocalypse, but a recurring event where the universe is periodically cleansed by flood or fire, a cosmic reset button that allows for a fresh beginning. A disaster, therefore, was not a random punishment, but a scheduled, albeit intense, phase in the life of the world. But what triggered these events on a smaller scale? The answer often lay in the concept of karma, the spiritual law of cause and effect. A devastating famine or a city-leveling earthquake could be interpreted as the collective karma of a society, the inevitable result of widespread immoral actions or a failure in royal duty. This belief turned disaster into a moral lesson, a call for communal introspection and penance. To mitigate this divine wrath, elaborate rituals were performed. The story of the river Ganga's descent from heaven perfectly illustrates this fusion of myth and nature. The goddess Ganga was brought down to earth by the prayers of a king to purify the souls of his ancestors. Her torrential flow, which could have shattered the planet, was gently caught in the matted hair of Lord Shiva, calming her power and allowing her to become a life-giving, sacred river. This is a profound metaphor for how a potentially destructive natural force was channeled into a source of purification and life through divine intervention and human devotion. This mythological framework directly influenced practical life. Temple architects, understanding the earth's potential to shake, developed ingenious techniques like interlocking stones and flexible foundations to help structures withstand Shiva's dance. And while mythology provided the primary narrative, there was also a parallel thread of early scientific inquiry. Texts from the Ayurvedic tradition sometimes explored natural causes for diseases that could follow floods, showing a budding curiosity about the material world. This unique duality allowed ancient Indian society to hold two ideas at once, viewing a disaster through a spiritual lens as a karmic recalibration, while also employing pragmatic knowledge to build resilience against it. The ground might shake by the will of a god, but a well-built temple could still stand. Yet even the cyclical dance of destruction and renewal could not match the raw, untamed power of the open ocean. For the Polynesian navigators who settled the vast Pacific, the sea was not a barrier but a living, breathing highway, a deity to be understood and respected in all its moods. Their world was one of immense beauty and profound danger, where a hurricane could rise from a calm horizon and a volcanic eruption could birth a new island overnight. To explain these awesome forces, they looked not to a single pantheon of distant gods, but to a family of elemental beings who were as passionate and unpredictable as the environment itself. In Hawaii, the fiery heart of the earth was personified by Pele, the formidable volcano goddess. Her anger was not an abstract concept, it was the very lava that consumed forests and villages, a terrifyingly real and creative destruction. A volcanic eruption was Pele moving her home, her tears forming the glassy strands of volcanic hair known as Pele's hair. A tsunami was not merely a wave, but the result of a squabble between ocean deities. The navigators who guided their double-hulled canoes across thousands of miles of open water held this knowledge sacred. They were scientists and priests in one, reading the language of the natural world with breathtaking accuracy. They watched the specific flight patterns of seabirds to gauge the distance to land, interpreted the shapes of clouds on the horizon that hinted at unseen islands, and felt the subtle shifts in ocean swells that warned of distant storms. This empirical knowledge was woven into the very fabric of their mythology. The great hero Maui did not just perform fantastical feats, he embodied the ultimate human struggle against nature's limits. Using a magical fishhook, he pulled islands from the sea depths, creating safe harbors. He lassoed the sun itself, forcing it to slow its journey across the sky to give people more hours of daylight for fishing and farming. These were not just entertaining stories, they were foundational lessons in ingenuity, resilience, and the audacious belief that humanity could negotiate with the elements. This deep respect was formalized through ritual. Before any long voyage, navigators and fishermen would perform chants and leave offerings of food and flowers to appease the gods of the wind and sea, seeking their protection. The entire community would participate, reinforcing their collective dependence on and stewardship of the natural world. This created a unique worldview where there was no separation between the human, the natural, and the divine. A disaster was not a punishment from an angry God in a far-off heaven, but a shift in the relationship with the living world immediately around them. It was a reminder to maintain balance, to offer respect, and to pay attention to the subtle signs that the environment was always providing. The Polynesian explanation was one of intimate dialogue, a continuous conversation with a world that was alive, conscious, and forever demanding our attention. This intricate dance with the elements finds a powerful echo in the ancient wisdom of Aboriginal Australia. Here, the very land itself is a living storybook, and every natural event is a sentence written by ancestral creators. The foundation of everything is the Dreamtime, a sacred era not of the past, but a continuous, eternal present where the world was sung into existence. The ancestral beings did not simply create the landscape and leave, they became it. A mountain range might be the frozen body of a great creator spirit, a river the path it carved as it journeyed across the continent. Because of this, a flood is never just water rising. It might be the rainbow serpent, one of the most powerful creator beings, stirring in her watery sleep deep beneath the earth. If her rest is disturbed, she can shift her colossal body, causing the ground to quake or sending floodwaters to reclaim the land. This is not an act of punishment, but a natural consequence of failing to respect her domain. Every crack in the earth, every unusual rock formation tells a chapter of this ongoing story. These narratives are not mere myths, they are intricate maps of survival. Stories of ancestral heroes encode crucial environmental knowledge. A songline about a hunter might describe the specific behavior of animals before a drought, or the way the wind shifts to warn of an approaching bushfire. This information, passed down through oral traditions, ceremonial dances, and intricate rock art, becomes a communal database for navigating a harsh and unpredictable environment. The use of fire itself is a perfect example. What outsiders might see as a dangerous wildfire, Aboriginal communities understood as a tool for land management. Cool, controlled burns, undertaken with precise knowledge passed down through generations, were used to clear dry undergrowth, encourage new plant growth to attract game, and create fire breaks to prevent much larger, catastrophic blazes later. This practice demonstrates a profound understanding of ecological cycles, where a potentially destructive force is harnessed for renewal and balance. In this worldview, humans are not separate from nature, nor are they its masters. They are custodians tasked with caring for their country through ritual, story, and practice. A disaster is a rupture in that relationship, a reminder to listen more closely to the stories embedded in the land. It is a call to restore balance through ceremony and respect, to sing the songs that keep the world in harmony. This holistic view, where spirituality and ecology are one, offers a timeless lesson in sustainability, written not in books but in the very fabric of the continent itself. Even a sprawling empire, master of engineering and law, could not control the skies or the earth. For the Romans, a natural disaster was not just a crisis, it was a critical failure in diplomacy with the divine. They called these events prodigia, terrifying omens that signified a rupture in the Pax Deorum, the sacred peace treaty between Rome and its gods. A sudden earthquake was Neptune flexing his power. The fiery cataclysm that buried Pompeii was not a geological event, but the unmistakable wrath of Jupiter or the subterranean forges of Vulcan roaring to life. These were not abstract myths, they were urgent state emergencies. The response was a highly organized, bureaucratic process of divine appeasement. The Senate itself would debate the meaning of an omen, and a special college of priests would be tasked with finding the solution. Their most important tool was the Sibylline books, a collection of ancient prophecies kept under guard and consulted only in direst need. The prescribed rituals were elaborate public spectacles. They might perform a lectistonium, a solemn ceremony where statues of the gods were brought out and placed on couches as honored guests, offered a lavish meal to soothe their anger. Or they might vow to build a new temple or hold days of public games and sacrifices, all in an effort to renegotiate the peace and secure the empire's safety. This system turned disaster management into a public performance of piety, reinforcing the state's role as the essential intermediary between its citizens and the unpredictable divine. Yet, even within this deeply religious framework, a different kind of curiosity was stirring. Figures like Pliny the Elder meticulously recorded natural events, not just as omens, but as phenomena with observable patterns. This duality, the blend of devout ritual and budding empirical observation, fueled some of Rome's greatest practical achievements. The same culture that sought to appease Neptune with sacrifices also built revolutionary aqueducts to control water and prevent floods. They engineered harbors with breakwaters to tame the sea's fury. Their explanations for disaster were woven into the very fabric of their statecraft, driving them to both pray for divine favor and build the ingenious structures that would, in practical terms, help them survive it. High in the Andes, the very ground beneath your feet was a sacred contract. For the Inca, the world operated on a simple, profound principle, Ayni, a concept of sacred reciprocity. This was not a vague spiritual idea, but a binding social and cosmic law, a continuous cycle of giving and receiving that governed everything from community relations to the movement of the stars. A successful harvest meant you owed the earth a gift. A safe journey demanded an offering of thanks. This system of mutual obligation extended to the gods themselves, and when the terms of this contract were breached, the consequences were immediate and terrifying. An earthquake was not a random seismic event. It was Pachamama, the Earth Mother, shaking in anger at being taken for granted. A drought was in Tai, the sun god, withholding his warmth and light because the people had become neglectful in their offerings. A landslide was the mountain spirits expressing their displeasure. In this worldview, a disaster was never an accident. It was a direct response, a cosmic correction for a failure in human duty. To maintain this delicate balance, the Inca engaged in constant acts of reciprocity. Priests would pour libations of chicha, a sacred corn beer, onto the soil to feed Pachamama. They performed the capacocha, a solemn ritual where unblemished children and fine textiles were offered to the mountain apus or spirits to appease them and ensure the stability of the empire. But this was not blind superstition. It was paired with brilliant empirical observation. At the Coricancha, the breathtaking temple of the sun in Cusco, priests tracked the heavens with astonishing precision. The alignment of windows and golden fixtures captured the first and last rays of the sun during solstices and equinoxes, creating a celestial calendar that predicted seasonal changes, warned of potential droughts, and dictated the optimal times for planting and harvest. This fusion of myth and science is captured in their creation story. The god Viracocha emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca, bringing light and life to a world of darkness. He shaped the mountains, rivers, and the first people from clay, but then withdrew, leaving humanity with a clear warning. The world was a fragile gift that required constant care and reverence. This narrative was the bedrock of their entire society, justifying the emperor's absolute authority as the son of Intai, the direct intermediary responsible for keeping Ayni with the gods. This profound need to maintain harmony did not just inspire rituals, it engineered an empire. Their legendary terracing systems, which carved elegant steps into sheer mountain slopes, were more than agricultural marvels. They were a form of topographical reverence, a way of working with Pachamama's contours to prevent the very erosion and landslides their myths warned against. Vast irrigation canals honored the water deities by ensuring not a single drop from the sacred glaciers was wasted. Every practical solution was also a spiritual act, a fulfillment of their reciprocal duty to the forces that sustained them. The Inca did not see a divide between the practical and the divine, between science and spirit. To them, building a sturdy terrace was as much an act of worship as offering a cup of chicha. Both were essential payments on a perpetual debt to a living, conscious world, a world that would always demand its due. Yet this profound fear of water's wrath was not unique to the Nile or the Andes. The very first civilizations recorded their own watery nightmares, stories so powerful they would echo for millennia. In the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the land between two unpredictable rivers, the flood was not a life-giving gift but a recurring terror. Here, the world's oldest stories were born from silt and survival, tales where the gods did not just warn, they obliterated. The Epic of Gilgamesh is perhaps the most famous, where the wise man Utnapishtim is secretly warned by the god E that the divine council, led by Enlil, is fed up with humanity's noise and plans to drown them all. His instructions are chillingly precise: build a perfect cube of a boat, abandon all wealth, and save the seed of all living things. After a storm so violent even the gods cower in fear, Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on a mountain, and he releases a dove, a swallow, and finally a raven to find dry land. His reward for obedience is immortality, but this was not the only version. The even older Atrahasis epic tells a similar story of divine annoyance, where the god Enki instructs his loyal servant to build an ark to escape a flood sent to silence a humanity that had overpopulated and become too loud. These narratives were not mere fantasy, they were born from a brutal reality. The Tigris and Euphrates did not flood with gentle predictability. They could surge with catastrophic, city-erasing power without warning. A story of a world-ending deluge was a way to make sense of that unimaginable trauma, to give a reason for the random devastation that could wipe out generations of work in a single day. But more than just an explanation, these myths served a crucial social function. They were powerful moral lessons about the dangers of hubris, teaching that humanity's survival depended on humility and strict obedience to the divine will. The hero is always the one who listens to the god, who follows the instructions without question. Priests and kings used these stories to reinforce their own authority, positioning themselves as the modern-day interpreters of that will, the essential intermediaries who could, through proper ritual and sacrifice, prevent such a disaster from happening again. This is why many rulers also claim to be great builders of canals and levees, practical measures framed as acts of divine appeasement. The persistence of the flood myth, from Mesopotamia to the Greek story of Deucalion and beyond, points to a deep, shared human anxiety. It is the ultimate symbol of our powerlessness against nature's raw force. But within that fear, these ancient stories also planted a seed of hope. They always end not with total annihilation, but with renewal. A pair of survivors, a boatload of animals, a chance to start again. This framing offered profound comfort, transforming a senseless tragedy into a purposeful, albeit severe, reset for a world that had lost its way. In the shadow of the ziggurat, these tales assured people that even the greatest disasters were part of a larger, divine cycle, one where obedience could ultimately secure a second chance. This authority was not just spiritual, it was deeply political. A king's legitimacy often depended on the priestly seal of approval. When a seer interpreted a strange weather pattern as a sign of divine displeasure, it could force a ruler to change policy, launch a military campaign, or even step down. Their word could authorize the construction of massive defensive walls or the draining of a swamp to prevent pestilence, mobilizing entire populations towards a common goal of survival. These figures were the ancient world's first risk managers, blending celestial charts with sacrificial rites to forecast the future. The Greek historian Herodotus recounts how the Lydian king Croesus tested several oracles, and only the Pythia at Delphi correctly identified what he was doing on a specific day, cooking a lamb and a turtle in a bronze pot. Convinced of her power, he then asked if he should wage war on Persia. Her famous reply was that if he did, a great empire would fall. He assumed it meant Persia, but it was his own. This story perfectly illustrates the immense weight placed on these cryptic pronouncements and their very real consequences for history. Their knowledge was a unique fusion of careful observation and divine inspiration. A Babylonian priest tracking the path of Venus was doing both science and theology, believing the planet's movements were the written words of the gods. By mediating between a terrified populace and the unpredictable forces of nature, these intermediaries provided something priceless, a sense of control. They transformed paralyzing fear into actionable steps, whether that meant a farmer making a small offering at a village shrine or an emperor commissioning a grand temple. This process gave people a script to follow in the face of chaos, a way to feel they were actively participating in their own salvation. It fostered incredible social cohesion, uniting communities under a shared narrative of meaning and a common set of rituals designed to keep the world from falling apart. Their legacy is a testament to the human mind's relentless drive to find patterns, to seek answers, and to build bridges across the terrifying abyss of the unknown. These beliefs were not confined to ritual, they were literally set in stone, shaping the very skyline of the ancient world. Across continents, the fear of divine wrath and the desire for cosmic harmony became the chief architects of cities, driving innovations that were both spiritually profound and brilliantly practical. In ancient India, where the earth was believed to shake from the dance of Shiva, temple builders developed a remarkable understanding of seismic activity. They constructed towering shikaras, the iconic spiral temples, using a method of interlocking stones. Without any mortar, these stones could shift and settle during an earthquake, allowing the structure to flex and dance with the ground rather than rigidly resisting it and shattering. This was not just engineering, it was a form of architectural devotion, a way of building in harmony with the destructive creative rhythm of the gods themselves. Far to the west in Mesopotamia, the terror was water. The Tigris and Euphrates could unleash biblical floods, seen as the rage of Enlil. In response, they became masters of hydraulic engineering, constructing complex networks of levees, canals, and reservoirs. These were not merely flood barriers, they were monumental offerings to the gods, massive public works projects designed to control the very element of divine punishment and prove their piety through action. The ziggurats that dominated their cities served a dual purpose. They were elevated platforms to keep temple precincts safe from floodwaters, and they were stairways to heaven, physical bridges for the gods to descend without drowning the world below. This fusion of myth and material science reached its zenith in the Americas. The Maya built their pyramids with such precise astronomical alignment that they became giant calendars in stone. On the equinoxes, the play of light and shadow would create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the steps of El Castillo at Chichen Itza. This was not for spectacle alone. It was a critical ritual moment that confirmed the cosmic order was intact, that the gods were present, and that the rains would come on schedule. A misalignment would have been a terrifying omen of divine abandonment and impending drought. High in the Andes, the Inca took a different approach to honoring Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Their legendary stonework, fitting massive boulders together without mortar so tightly that a knife blade cannot slip between them, was a direct response to her tremors. These walls could sway and settle during earthquakes, a testament to their belief that the best way to survive the Earth's movement was to move with it, to show respect for its power through flexible strength. Even the Greeks, for all their budding philosophy, designed their temples as offerings to specific deities for protection. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, was not just a beautiful building. Its proportions were carefully calculated to reflect cosmic harmony, a mathematical plea for order in a world threatened by the chaos of Poseidon's earthquakes. Every column, every pediment was a prayer in marble, an attempt to geometrically persuade the gods to shield their city from harm. In this way, ancient cities were not just collections of buildings, they were physical dialogues with the divine, engineered responses to existential fear. The drive to appease a god or align with a star did not stifle innovation. It inspired it, pushing human ingenuity to its limits and leaving behind monuments that still leave us in awe today. But this drive to build and appease slowly kindled a new kind of curiosity, a desire to look beyond the gods for patterns in the chaos itself. A profound intellectual shift began to ripple through the ancient world, where mythological explanations were no longer the only answer. In Greece, the philosopher Aristotle watched the earth tremble and proposed a startlingly natural theory. He suggested that great winds became trapped in vast subterranean caves, struggling to escape their prison and shaking the ground in their violent effort to break free. This was not the work of Poseidon's trident, but a physical process that could, in theory, be studied and understood. Across the world, Chinese scholars of the Han Dynasty engineered a breathtakingly ingenious device, the first seismoscope. Crafted from bronze and adorned with dragons and toads, this vessel was said to detect distant tremors, with a ball dropping from a dragon's mouth into the waiting mouth of a toad below, indicating the direction of the quake. It was a machine designed to read the Earth's language, not a god's mood. This new lens of observation was also applied to human suffering. The Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of Greek medical texts, broke from tradition by arguing that diseases which often followed floods or famines were not divine punishments. Instead, they were the result of environmental factors of bad air, contaminated water, and poor sanitation. This was a revolutionary idea that illness had a natural cause and therefore a potential natural solution. In ancient India, the Sushruta Samhita, a foundational text of surgery and medicine, went even further. It provided detailed guidance on public health in the wake of disasters, advising on the purification of water and the management of waste to prevent the outbreak of epidemics after a flood. This was pragmatic knowledge born from careful observation, not ritual. This evolution did not mean people abandoned their gods. Instead, a fascinating duality emerged. A community might still offer sacrifices to a river god for protection, while simultaneously building stronger levees based on years of observing flood patterns. A king would consult his priests for omens, but also his engineers for structural reinforcements. This blend of spiritual faith and empirical curiosity was not a contradiction for them. It was simply using every tool available to survive in an unpredictable world. This transition marks a pivotal moment in human history, where the relentless desire for control over our environment began to complement the need for meaning. It was the first step on a long path from wondering why the gods were angry to asking how the world works, a journey that would eventually lead from the temple to the laboratory, without ever fully losing its sense of wonder. These stories, carved into ziggurats and whispered in desert winds, were never truly isolated. A powerful pattern emerges when we step back and view them on a global scale. a shared human lexicon for decoding catastrophe. Cultures separated by vast oceans and impassable mountains, with no possible contact, somehow arrived at startlingly similar conclusions. A world-covering flood sent by displeased gods appears not just in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, but in the Greek myth of Deucalion, the Hindu Puranas, and the legends of indigenous peoples from the Americas to Australia. Why would societies with no shared language or history all tell a story about a great deluge? The answer lies not in a single historical event, but in a universal human experience. Rivers flood, coastlines are swallowed by storm surges, and the terrifying memory of water reclaiming the land is etched into our collective psyche. Each culture adapted this core fear to its own landscape and values. For the Mesopotamians, the flood was a punishment for noise and overpopulation. For the Greeks, it was a consequence of human hubris. For many indigenous cultures, it was part of a cyclical process of cleansing and renewal. The specifics changed, but the underlying message was a constant, a profound lesson about humility in the face of nature's overwhelming power. This pattern repeats with other disasters. Earthquakes were almost universally seen as the movement or anger of a powerful being, whether it was Poseidon striking the ground, Shiva performing his destructive dance, or Pachamama shifting beneath her blanket of soil. Droughts and famines were interpreted as tests of faith or divine withdrawal, a sign that the community had failed in its duties, from the pharaoh neglecting Maat to the Inca emperor failing to maintain Ayni. These parallels reveal our ancestors wrestling with the same fundamental questions we do today. Why do the innocent suffer? How can we prevent this from happening again? Is there a reason behind the chaos? By crafting these narratives, they were attempting to impose moral order on a seemingly random universe, transforming helplessness into a framework for action. If a disaster was a punishment, then better behavior could avert it. If it was a test, then perseverance could overcome it. This global perspective shows us that while the names of the gods changed, the human fears and hopes they represented did not. This shared storytelling impulse did more than provide comfort. It became a subtle thread connecting distant civilizations. As traders and migrants moved along silk roads and sea routes, they carried these stories with them. A traveler from Mesopotamia might have heard a version of the flood myth in an Indian port city, recognizing a profound similarity beneath the foreign names and rituals. These narratives became a form of deep cultural exchange, a way to find common ground with strangers through a shared understanding of life's fragility. They remind us that before we built borders, we built stories to explain the same terrifying and magnificent world. These divine explanations for disaster did more than just calm fears. They built the very architecture of power. Across the ancient world, the ability to interpret a tremor or a drought was the ultimate political tool, a direct line to divine authority that kings and emperors were quick to claim for themselves. In Egypt, the pharaoh was not just a ruler, he was a living god, the sole being responsible for maintaining Maat, the cosmic order. When the Nile failed to flood or a sandstorm scoured the land, it was not a natural event, it was a direct reflection of his failure. His rituals were not mere ceremony, they were essential state functions, acts of cosmic maintenance that kept chaos at bay. This gave him absolute power, but it came with an immense burden. The well-being of the entire nation rested on his shoulders alone. A prolonged famine could shatter the people's faith, proving he had lost the god's favor and justifying his overthrow. We see the same precarious balance in China with the mandate of heaven. Here, an earthquake was not a geological accident. It was a celestial report card on the emperor's virtue. A dynasty only held power as long as it governed with justice and wisdom. Natural disasters were the heavens' way of withdrawing that mandate, a clear signal that rebellion was not just possible, but morally justified. This belief provided a powerful mechanism for political change, allowing new dynasties to rise from the ashes of a famine, claiming they were restoring the balance that a corrupt ruler had broken. In Mesopotamia, the king's role as chief priest was just as critical. He was the essential intermediary between a fearful populace and the irritable gods like Enlil. His diviners read the livers of sheep for omens, and his engineers built ziggurats and canals not just as civic projects, but as massive offerings to secure divine protection. His entire legitimacy was tied to his ability to keep the gods happy and the rivers from flooding. This authority even shaped the law. The famous Code of Hammurabi was not just a list of crimes and punishments. It was presented as a gift from the sun god Shamash, divinely inspired to maintain order and prevent the social chaos that could invite divine wrath. The Romans turned disaster response into a brilliant political spectacle. When a famine struck, an emperor like Augustus didn't just distribute grain, he performed highly public rituals, consulting the Sibylline books and hosting lavish games to honor Ceres, the goddess of the harvest. This was a masterful display of piety and power, demonstrating to the people that he alone could negotiate with the gods for their survival, thereby strengthening his political legitimacy through effective crisis management. And in the Maya world, the stakes were even higher. During a drought, the priest-king would perform a brutal bloodletting ritual, piercing his own tongue to offer his life force to the rain god Chak. His willingness to endure this pain was the ultimate proof of his commitment to his people. If the rains came, his power was cemented. If they did not, the failure was his alone, a sign that his connection to the gods was broken, often leading to his downfall and the abandonment of the city. This intricate dance between disaster and governance created the first policies for public safety. Building codes in earthquake-prone regions, intricate irrigation systems in arid lands, and grain storage in case of famine. All these practical measures were often framed as acts of religious devotion designed to appease the gods. This interplay was the engine of early statecraft, using the fear of nature's fury to organize labor, collect taxes, and build the institutions that would shape human civilization for millennia. The ruler who could explain the storm could ultimately command the army. Yet the very forces that could topple empires were often given a distinctly human face, a gender that reflected a culture's deepest values and fears. In the ancient world, disaster was rarely a neutral event. It was a drama played out by gods and goddesses who embodied societal ideas about power, creation, and destruction. The Hawaiian volcano goddess Pele was not an abstract concept of fire. She was a passionate, tempestuous woman whose eruptions were her fiery emotions made manifest, her tears forming the glassy strands of volcanic hair. Her power was both creative and destructive, capable of building new land just as quickly as she could consume it. This mirrored a widespread ancient association between the feminine and the natural world, a force that gives life but can also take it away. In Greece, the famine that followed a poor harvest was personified by the grief of the goddess Demeter, a mother who could make the entire world wither and die if her daughter was taken from her. Her sorrow was not a private matter, it was a global catastrophe. This connection often granted women unique ritual authority. At the Oracle of Delphi, the most influential voice in the ancient Mediterranean belonged not to a king or a general, but to the Pythia, a priestess who inhaled sacred vapors to deliver the prophecies that would launch fleets and avert disasters. Her words were the direct line to Apollo, and no major decision was made without her counsel. In other traditions, women performed rain dances, interpreted omens, and led ceremonies to soothe angry nature spirits. their roles seen as essential for communal survival. But mythology could also be a tool to reinforce control. Many cultures depicted the most cataclysmic forces as the domain of powerful male gods. The Greeks gave the trident to Poseidon, whose masculine rage could shatter the earth. The Norse had Thor, whose hammer blows were the thunder that shook the sky. In these stories, ultimate authority over chaos often rested with a patriarchal figure, a narrative that subtly justified male dominance in social and political structures. These myths were not just stories, they were lessons. Tales of vengeful goddesses like the Hindu Kali served as stark warnings, teaching that disrespecting women or exploiting nature would invite a terrible and transformative reckoning. The very way a society explained a hurricane or an earthquake revealed its blueprint for human relationships, dictating who held the power to interpret the event, who was tasked with appeasing it, and what moral codes were reinforced in the aftermath. The gender of a disaster god was never accidental. It was a profound reflection of who a culture believed should hold the reins of life and death. This deep need to find meaning in chaos was not just about power or politics, it was a fundamental human response to overwhelming fear. When the ground split open or the sky turned to fire, ancient peoples were not just witnessing a geological event, they were experiencing a profound psychological trauma. Their mythological explanations provided a crucial sense of comfort, transforming a random, senseless tragedy into an event with a purpose. A flood was not just water, it was a god's cleansing. An earthquake was not just shifting plates, it was a deity's footsteps. This narrative gave them a framework to process the unprocessable, replacing paralyzing anxiety with a story they could understand. It was a way to impose order on the terrifying randomness of nature, to believe that even the most destructive events were part of a larger, divine plan that could include justice, renewal, or a moral lesson. This process of meaning-making is something modern psychology recognizes as a core coping mechanism, a way for the human mind to regain a sense of control when faced with the utterly uncontrollable. These stories did more than comfort individuals, they forged unbreakable bonds within communities. In the aftermath of a disaster, the entire village or city would come together to perform a ritual. A shared sacrifice to Poseidon, a collective prayer to Inti, a communal dance for rain. These were not solitary acts, they were powerful exercises in solidarity, a way for people to feel they were actively doing something together to restore balance and prevent future calamities. This collective action transformed helplessness into a shared purpose, strengthening social cohesion and reminding everyone that they were not facing the terror alone. This is why these events were so often memorialized in art, pottery, and epic poetry. The story of a great flood or a city swallowed by the earth was not just a tale, it was a way to process collective trauma, to transform a horrifying memory into a teachable moment for future generations. The story itself became a tool for healing and adaptation, a narrative anchor that helped the community remember, learn, and ultimately endure. The enduring power of these myths lies not in their scientific accuracy, but in their profound emotional truth. They show us that from the very beginning, our greatest tool for survival has been our ability to tell ourselves a story that makes the suffering bearable. This ancient wisdom did not simply vanish with the rise of modern science. It quietly embedded itself into the very soil of our collective consciousness. The stories our ancestors told were far more than fanciful explanations. They were the first instruction manuals for sustainable living, encoded in myth and ritual for generations to come. Consider the indigenous practice of controlled burning. What outsiders might mistake for a dangerous wildfire was, in fact, a sophisticated form of land management. By carefully setting small, cool fires to clear dry underbrush, These cultures were not just preventing catastrophic blazes, they were renewing the soil, encouraging the growth of new plants to attract game, and maintaining the health of the entire ecosystem. This practice was a direct application of a spiritual belief, a way of working with the natural cycle of destruction and renewal that their myths so vividly described. Similarly, the Inca's breathtaking terracing, which carved elegant steps into the sides of mountains, was not merely an agricultural feat. It was a physical prayer to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, designed to prevent the very landslides and soil erosion their myths warned would come from neglecting her. Each terrace was an act of reverence, a way of saying we will work with your contours, not against them. This principle of reciprocity extended to every element of the environment. The belief that spirits inhabited forests, rivers, and mountains created a powerful conservation ethic long before the word existed. To pollute a river was not just a practical mistake, it was a profound spiritual offense, an invitation for the water spirit to retaliate with drought or flood. To clear-cut a forest was to evict the entities that lived within it, guaranteeing their wrath would follow. This world, you fostered a deep and abiding sense of responsibility, an understanding that humanity's survival was inextricably linked to the health of the world around them. In our current era of climate change and environmental crisis, these ancient perspectives feel less like superstition and more like startlingly prescient wisdom. They offer a crucial lesson we are only now relearning, that true resilience comes not from dominating nature, but from partnering with it. By revisiting these beliefs, we are not advocating a return to the past, but rather seeking to blend timeless principles of balance and reciprocity with the tools of modern science. This holistic approach to disaster preparedness honors both our cultural heritage and our planetary health, suggesting that the most effective way to safeguard our future might be to listen to the voices of the past. These ancient stories did not fade away with the rise of modern science. They simply changed form, embedding themselves into the very language we use every day. Consider the word tsunami, a direct import from Japanese meaning harbor wave. This term carries with it the deep cultural memory of island peoples who lived with a constant, reverent fear of the ocean's sudden, towering fury. Or think of the legal and insurance phrase act of God, a chillingly direct echo of those ancient beliefs that framed catastrophe as a divine intervention beyond human control or understanding. We still reach for these mythological concepts when our own explanations fall short. Our symbols are equally telling. The vibrant patterns of Aboriginal art often feature the rainbow serpent, that powerful creator being whose movements can still cause floods and quakes, keeping an ancient world visually alive for new generations. In Hawaii, the hula and chants performed during the Merry Monarch Festival are not just entertainment. They are active retellings of Peel's volcanic power, a continuous dialogue with the goddess of fire herself. This legacy is perhaps most visible in our blockbuster films and best-selling novels. Disaster stories, from movies about asteroids to books about pandemics, almost always follow a familiar arc. A society grows arrogant or corrupt and is then humbled by a colossal force, forcing a struggle for survival and ultimate redemption. This is not a new plot. It is the same narrative of divine punishment and human resilience found in the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Legend of Atlantis, repackaged for a modern audience. We are still using those ancient frameworks to process our own fears. Recognizing this thread connecting past and present does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It reveals a profound continuity in human thought. It shows us that our modern understanding of risk, preparedness, and community resilience is built upon a foundation of stories thousands of years old. Our ancestors may have explained a volcano with a goddess, and we explain it with tectonic plates, but the awe it inspires and the collective need to respond remains powerfully, enduringly the same. Even with all our satellites and sensors, we still watch the horizon with a primal unease. Modern science has given us the language of plate tectonics, atmospheric pressure, and seismic waves, a precise vocabulary that explains the mechanics of our world. We no longer see a tsunami as the vengeance of a sea god, but as the result of an undersea megathrust earthquake displacing colossal volumes of water. A hurricane is not the breath of a wind deity, but a complex heat engine fueled by warm ocean waters. This evidence-based understanding is our most powerful tool for prediction and survival, allowing us to build early warning systems and engineer resilient infrastructure. Yet, if we listen closely, we can hear a profound similarity between the ancient priest tracking Venus and the modern meteorologist tracking a storm. Both are engaged in the same essential human endeavor, the relentless search for patterns in the chaos. One looked to the celestial dance of gods for meaning, the other to the mathematical models of supercomputers. But the driving need to reduce uncertainty and find a cause is a thread that connects us across millennia. This shared goal reveals that our ancestors were not merely superstitious, they were astute observers of their world. Their methods were different, but their observations were often remarkably accurate. The Maya, for instance, developed a calendar so precise it could predict celestial events centuries in advance, which they then intertwined with their mythology about the rain god Chak. They saw no contradiction between tracking the stars and performing a bloodletting ritual. Both were valid paths to understanding and influencing their environment. We see this fusion of practical knowledge and spiritual belief in their architecture. The ancient builders of India, who spoke of earthquakes as the dance of Shiva, constructed temples with interlocking stones that could sway with the tremors, a principle shockingly similar to the base isolation techniques we use in modern skyscrapers. They may have explained the why through myth, but their solutions to the how were born from generations of careful, empirical trial and error. This suggests that mythology and science are not opposites on a timeline, but can be complementary ways of knowing. Science gives us the mechanism, the incredible how of a disaster, but it does not always address the deeper, more human question of why us or why now. This is where ancient wisdom retains its power. It provides a narrative framework for processing collective trauma, for building community solidarity, and for encoding vital lessons about living in balance with our environment. The modern concept of building codes finds its echo in the Inca principle of Ayni, or sacred reciprocity, which taught that building stable, respectful structures was a duty to the earth itself. Our disaster relief efforts mirror the communal rituals that brought ancient people together to rebuild after a catastrophe, reinforcing social bonds that are just as critical for survival as any physical aid. The most resilient path forward may be to build a bridge between these two worldviews. We can and must use the full power of science to predict hurricanes and reinforce our cities against earthquakes. But we can also honor the cultural narratives that have guided communities for generations, recognizing their value in fostering psychological resilience and environmental stewardship. By weaving together the empirical clarity of modern science with the timeless wisdom of ancient stories, we create a more holistic, more human approach to disaster management. It is an approach that protects not just our bodies from the storm, but also our spirits, ensuring that we face the uncertain future not with fear alone, but with the combined strength of knowledge and meaning. The most fragile clay tablet could outlast the mightiest empire. Long after temples crumbled and kings were forgotten, it was art and literature that carried the voice of the ancient world, meticulously preserving their explanations for nature's fury. Scribes in Mesopotamia pressed a stylus into wet clay, inscribing the epic of Gilgamesh with its cataclysmic flood, ensuring that the story of divine displeasure and a great arc would survive for millennia. A Greek artisan painted a scene of a volcanic eruption on a ceramic vase, not as a geological event, but as the fiery wrath of the gods descending upon a city. These were not mere decorations, they were vital records, the hard drives of their time, encoding a culture's deepest fears and beliefs for future generations. Epic poems became the primary vehicles for this knowledge. Homer's Iliad is filled with gods whipping up storms to change the course of a battle or striking the earth with thunderbolts to express their favor. The Indian Mahabharata uses disasters as pivotal turning points, moments where divine judgment intervenes in human conflict, weaving moral lessons about duty, honor, and the consequences of arrogance directly into the fabric of the story. These narratives did more than just explain why the ground shook. They taught entire societies how to behave, embedding cultural values within unforgettable tales of heroism and tragedy. Visual art served as a parallel language. On the walls of Maya temples, vivid murals depicted the rain god Chok wielding his lightning axe, a powerful visual plea for life-giving water. Egyptian hieroglyphs carved into obelisks showed the pharaoh presenting offerings to Hapi, the Nile god, illustrating the direct link between royal ritual and the river's annual bounty. A mosaic in a Roman villa might depict Neptune calming a storm, a daily reminder of the sea's power and the necessity of appeasing its master. This creative expression provided a profound psychological outlet. By transforming a terrifying event into a beautiful painting or a powerful poem, ancient peoples were actively processing collective trauma. They were taking the paralyzing fear of a memory and giving it a shape, a rhythm, a meaning that could be shared and understood. A community could gather to hear a bard recite an epic about a great flood, and in that telling, their own fear became part of a larger, more manageable story of survival and renewal. This process memorialized the event, yes, but more importantly, it helped to heal the community, binding them together with a shared narrative that could be passed down. Today, these artifacts are priceless windows. A single cracked tablet found in the Iraqi desert can tell us more about how the Mesopotamians viewed divine punishment than a dozen theoretical texts. The soot patterns on a Greek vase can lead archaeologists to identify a specific volcanic eruption that inspired the artwork. We are not just studying art, we are deciphering an ancient manual on disaster response, written in the universal language of human creativity. This enduring legacy reminds us that in the face of the incomprehensible, we have always turned to story and image, not just to record what happened, but to find the beauty and meaning hidden within the chaos. That ancient mosaic of myth and meaning offers a startlingly modern blueprint for survival. While we have replaced divination with Doppler radar, the core challenges remain the same: how to prepare communities, strengthen psychological resilience, and read the subtle signs of a changing world. Our ancestors were masters of this, and their strategies, born from necessity, hold profound lessons for our own disaster preparedness. They understood that a community that prays together, and more importantly, prepares together, is far more likely to survive together. Their rituals were not just for the gods, they were powerful exercises in social cohesion, binding people with a shared purpose and a common script to follow when chaos struck. This created a built-in support network, a form of social capital that is just as critical as any stockpile of emergency supplies. In times of crisis, knowing your neighbor is not just a nicety, it is a lifeline, a truth ancient cultures encoded into their very way of life. This wisdom extended to the land itself, offering a masterclass in environmental observation long before the first satellite was launched. The Polynesian navigators did not have weather apps. They had a 1,000-year-old database of knowledge written in the stars, the waves, and the flight patterns of birds. They could read the subtle shifts in swell that hinted at a distant storm, allowing them to avoid catastrophe entirely. Similarly, the indigenous practice of controlled burning, a ritual often tied to stories of fire spirits, was in fact a brilliant form of land management. By carefully setting small, cool fires, they cleared out dry underbrush, preventing the kind of catastrophic megafires that now routinely devastate regions that have suppressed natural fire cycles for decades. This was not myth, it was sophisticated ecological science, passed down through generations in the language of story. The true power lies in weaving these ancient threads into the modern fabric of disaster response. Imagine combining the predictive power of our supercomputers with the nuanced, place-based knowledge of local communities. A tsunami warning system is infinitely more effective if it incorporates the oral histories of coastal villages, which often contain precise accounts of past inundations that are absent from official records. Evacuation plans become more inclusive and effective when they respect cultural gathering places and traditional leadership structures. This integrative approach does more than just save lives. It honors the profound connection people have to their land and their history, transforming top-down directives into collaborative partnerships. It acknowledges that a person is not just a body to be moved to safety, but a mind and a spirit that need to understand why, and to feel that their way of knowing is respected. By building bridges between the temple and the laboratory, we create a resilience that is not just physical, but cultural and psychological, forging a future where we face the storm with every tool we have ever invented, from the sacred story to the silicon chip. These ancient stories are far more than dusty myths from a forgotten world. They are a mirror reflecting our own deepest needs, a timeless testament to the human spirit's quest for meaning in the midst of chaos. When the ground trembles or the skies darken today, we may reach for scientific data, but we are still answering the same fundamental questions our ancestors did. Why did this happen? How do we cope? What do we do now? Their narratives reveal our inherent drive to transform random suffering into a story with purpose, to find a lesson in the ruin or a chance for renewal after the storm. This is not a primitive impulse we have outgrown. It is the very core of our resilience. It is what allows communities to come together after a hurricane, not just to rebuild houses, but to rebuild hope, weaving a new chapter of solidarity from the broken pieces. These tales connect us in an unbroken chain to those who came before, who also looked at a shattered world and dared to ask what it meant. They offer a profound perspective on modern challenges, from a changing climate to a global pandemic. Our ancestors understood that a crisis was not just a physical event, but a cultural and psychological one that required a story to navigate. Their wisdom enriches our heritage, providing a deep well of inspiration for art and literature that grapples with themes we still struggle with: the delicate balance between order and chaos, the fragility of civilization, and the enduring power of the human will to persevere. In an age dominated by science and technology, these ancient voices remind us that data alone cannot heal a broken spirit. They call us to embrace empathy, creativity, and spiritual reflection, to remember that understanding our place in the universe requires both the precision of a satellite and the wisdom of a parable. By holding ancient intuition in one hand and modern knowledge in the other, we can approach disaster with a fuller, more humble wisdom. We become better prepared not just to survive, but to understand and perhaps even to grow. That timeless impulse to find meaning in chaos is the true legacy of these ancient stories. They were not primitive attempts at science, but profound expressions of the human spirit, crafted to answer questions that still echo in our hearts today. Why do we suffer? How do we carry on? What is our responsibility to each other and to the world we inhabit? From the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the temples of the Maya, our ancestors answered with narratives of divine warning, cosmic balance, and sacred reciprocity. These myths were the original handbooks for resilience, teaching that a community bound by shared story and ritual could withstand almost any blow. They transformed paralyzing fear into collective action, reminding people they were not facing the storm alone. In our modern world, with all our technology and data, we still grapple with the same essential needs. We still seek comfort in the aftermath of a tragedy. We still look for lessons in the wreckage, and we still find our greatest strength in the communities that come together to heal and rebuild. The ancient voices from across the centuries offer us a crucial reminder that while we must use every tool of science to predict the hurricane and reinforce our cities, we must also tend to the human heart. The most effective disaster plan includes not just emergency supplies, but also the bonds of empathy, the power of a shared narrative, and the timeless wisdom of living in balance with our world. Thank you for joining this exploration of how ancient cultures explained natural disasters. We invite you to share which story resonated most with you in the comments below, and to subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of our past.